Stefano Domenicali has shared a very controversial plan on the table when it comes to sprint races, and it seems like F1 drivers are going to get pretty angry with where the sport is slowly but surely heading towards. After the sprint races have received some much needed and well accepted modifications, Domenicali is now adamant that there is a possibility in which we're going to see these races in more or less every weekend. But is this achievable with the current F1 format, and how will the drivers react on having 24 sprint events in a year? It goes without saying that one of the most controversial topics in the past couple of years is the sprint race weekend, but after the modifications that have separated the event from the main Grand Prix in terms of the Parc Fermé rules, the acceptance from the drivers and the teams has been kindly welcomed by the F1 community in general. Domenicali, though, has hinted towards increasing the number of sprint races from 6 to 8, and if you're to look at the statements made from drivers like Alonso and Verstappen, this wouldn't bode well with the F1 grid, because as much as the change was good, the three-time world champion was adamant that the sport shouldn't over-push it in the seeking of finding more glory and popularity. When talking about the future plans of the sport, Domenicali said, "From next year, there will be room for more sprint races, and we're discussing whether it is possible to do it like MotoGP in the future with all sprint races." As of now, we are witnessing 6 sprint race events, and the initial plan of Domenicali was to introduce 2 more, or something around a third of the entire calendar to be covered with sprint events. This is something that will be greeted from the F1 fans because it brings a lot of excitement and competitiveness to the grid, especially now that it has been divided from the main event on Sunday, which means that the drivers can push to a greater extent during the sprint race itself. Obviously, though, with the competition being very close now, every point counts, and that means that the risks should be taken by the drivers who are in a close fight in the championship, such as Norris and Verstappen in this instance. But if we're headed in a calendar that would have 24 sprint events, it's going to be very interesting to see how the drivers will react to this, because a lot of maths will be done before every race. The current regulation era has provided an insight when it comes to the domination of the cars on specific circuits, which has been the primary issue for teams like Red Bull, Ferrari and Mercedes, as McLaren proved to be a tough nut to crack on almost every venue we've been to since Miami. This is a very good indicator that teams can and will be precautionary when they need to be, and take the throttle off when they don't, which could bring a lot of tactical wars to the paddock, and that might not be the best way to win races. Every fan wants to see a battle on the track, but if the cars and the drivers are forced to push it to the absolute maximum twice per weekend, then more crashes and dissatisfied team principals as well as drivers will definitely be some of the main things that the teams will have to deal with. On top of that, Domenicali has spoken highly about the possibility of having reversed grids from 2025 onwards. As the Italian said, "I remember when we introduced F1's sprint events, we had a lot of criticism from the purists, who we need to always listen to, even to the ones who are not happy with it. But I feel that now the thing has shifted completely the other way around. I think that the change we've introduced this year is the right one for many reasons, with separate qualifying and Parc Fermé. The flow is much better today." And then, of course, there are certain topics that are always quite debatable. We can really once again discuss if there is the need to reverse the grid or half the grid, like what F2 and F3 are doing. So these are always things to keep the mind alive, if I may say, with the intent to keep something always interesting. There has been a lot of criticism towards Domenicali about this, because it's effectively ruining the weekend for a driver who has had an extremely positive qualifying on Friday. For example, if Norris or Verstappen or any other driver extracts the maximum out of the car, they could find themselves starting P10 after winning the pole position, and with the dirty air coming from the cars ahead, overtaking would be extremely difficult. On the other hand, drivers who are having mediocre weekends and are qualifying P10 on Friday would end up on pole, and if they manage to somehow push their midfield cars to the absolute extreme for 100 kilometers, which is the length of the sprint race, then we could be looking at an extremely effective race weekend. But Domenicali doesn't believe in the concept of fake racing that he's been accused of, and when addressing those claims, the Italian said, "Personally, I would say say, why not reversed grids? It's a lot of action. It is overtaking. You are fighting for points. Some people can say, oh, it is a fake way of racing. Fake? There is nothing fake related to what you believe is the right format to produce great action, so I would be interested to discuss that again. Furthermore, what could turn out to be good news for the F1 drivers is that the sport is seemingly keen on remaining to race on 24 events, which could be bad news for legendary tracks like Barcelona, Spa or Zandvoort, because Madrid, of course, is coming from 2026 onwards, and Domenicali has been firm that the calendar will remain at 24 races in the foreseeable future. Elaborating on this, he went on to say, more and more countries want a Grand Prix. We are also in talks with Africa and Rwanda. We used to be Eurocentric. Now, Europe represents about a third of the World Championship, and we will stay at 24 Grand Prix. Verstappen has had his share of thoughts when it comes to the sprint events, and the Dutchman is known for disliking the sprint events in general. When being pushed to give an answer to this question, the three-time world champion has stated that over-pushing it will do more harm than good to the sport, so we can safely assume that he won't be the happiest individual on the grid if we are going to 24 sprint events in the foreseeable future. This would add more towards the scenario of him retiring earlier rather than later, because during an interview in Zandvoort, which was Max's 200th career race, the Dutchman was asked whether or not he has it in himself to drive 200 more races, to which he categorically said no, and confirmed is now closer to the end of his career rather than the start. When talking about the entire situation with the sprint events, Verstappen said, the sprint format was better, I think, a bit more straightforward, I would say, but yeah, let's not overdo it as well, because we are doing 24 races a year, 6 of these sprint events as well. I get it, I guess it sells better and better numbers on TV, but it's also more stress on the mechanics and everything to get everything tip-top every time. You have to deal with it, but let's not think that now we need 12 of those, because it will take its toll on people as well. Other drivers have been more fond of the previous format that disabled the teams to just make the car perfect throughout the car weekend, like Norris, and that is something that will not be taken into consideration anymore because of the new format that is allowing the teams to work on the car after the sprint race and for the main event as well. And interestingly enough, these are not the only changes that Domenicali is planning for F1's future, as with the ever-growing and evolving sport of Formula 1, there are constant changes that everyone needs to adapt to. The latest one is about the rookie drivers and them participating in a sprint race that will be held after the last race of the calendar, Abu Dhabi. Domenicali is a very big fan of this idea, and he believes that it enables the rookie drivers to gain more experience in F1 machinery, as well as prove their wheel-to-wheel battle capacities to the F1 teams, which could prove pivotal for their future in the sport. Elaborating further, Domenicali said, there is a project on the table, namely the possibility of organising a sprint race for young drivers in Abu Dhabi. We are reflecting on how to give young people the opportunity during the Yas Marina test to shine and gain experience, not only by driving in the test, but also in a competitive context. It would certainly help their training, aimed at making them prepared for the next step. We will talk about it in detail by the end of September to understand the feasibility of this idea. With all this in mind, do you think that there is a valid possibility that Formula 1 can introduce 24 sprint events in a calendar? And if so, do you think it will have a negative impact on the drivers as well as the competitiveness of the sport, which is now slowly but surely moving towards fame and popularity rather than the pure racing factor? Let us know what you think in the comments below, and once you've done that, have a look at the video that's appearing on your screen right now.